Hello, the internet. It's me, Eric, from the Reptile Room. Now, this video was supposed to be some fancy fandangled scripted fancy doohick. However, I'm running out of time. The UBCM is coming up pretty quick here, and I gotta get this video out. So y'all are kind of getting the rough and uncut version. I've got scripts that I've printed. I was gonna go through those. It was gonna be very, very fancy, but here we are, and this is what we get. So let's dive right into it. So the UBCM is the Union of British Columbian Municipalities. This is a meeting of municipal leaders from across the province that get together and they discuss propositions to the provincial government about changes that are made to legislation. So what I have right here on this piece of paper is a printed out copy of the recommendation from Port Moodys. NR 75, and there are some things in here that as a animal educator and reptile owner and enthusiast I have some concerns about. So without further ado, let's dive into this. So I'm going to start off by reading this out and we are going to then reapproach it and break it down. So NR 75 regarding mobile live animal programs. Where you going, little buddy? Wait right there. Thank you. Okay, so starting. Whereas mobile live animal programs where animals are transported to, be displayed to, handled or offered for sale to the public can create distress for animals and introduce risks of zoonotic disease transmission and injury for people and other animals. And whereas wild and exotic animals are not domesticated and suffer physically and psychologically when kept, bred, displayed, and sold in captivity. Therefore, it be resolved that UBCM ask the Province of British Columbia to regulate mobile live animal programs to address animal welfare concerns and public health and safety risks. And be it further resolved, UBCM ask the Province of British Columbia to update the Controlled Alien Species Regulation to equally prioritize animal welfare considerations alongside public safety, and prohibit the import, keeping, breeding, and transport of all exotic species. This is starting to not sound so good. So this is the recommendation. There are some notes underneath this. So the UBCM Resolutions Committee comments. This is in regards to world building for this proposition. The Resolutions Committee advises the UBCM membership has not... The Resolutions Committee advises that the UBCM membership has not previously considered a resolution calling on the province to regulate mobile live animal programs to address animal welfare concerns and public health and safety risks. They mean they ain't done this before in government talk. However, the committee... Buddy! Oh, it's okay. You hang out there. Okay. The Resolutions Committee advises... However, the committee notes that the membership has considered and endorsed resolutions seeking expanded controls around exotic species. Resolution 2007 B126 asked the province to amend the Wildlife Act to regulate the keeping and sale of exotic animals in BC by including a list of exotic animals that are prohibited to keep or sell in BC. This is our current system, and frankly, it works all right. Where are you going, little buddy? You're going for a little hike. Okay, the membership also endorsed Resolution 2023 NR50, which sought to amend the Controlled Alien Species Regulation to prohibit hybrid exotic cats and dogs, and to further amend the regulation to create a positive list of permitted species to replace the existing negative list of prohibited species. So what they basically implemented, or what they recommended in 2007, that did wind up becoming implemented. In 2023, they recommended changing to a much less effective system. So that is NR 75. Let's break down what all that's about. As a concerned conservationalist and advocate for animal welfare and responsible keeping, there are some parts of UBCM 2025 Resolution NR 75 that I take umbrage with, and I believe I have a good warrant to do so. Below, I will write out verbatim Resolution NR 75, which we did just read, and in parentheses highlight the aforementioned concerns. So, How about y'all follow me along on this lovely little journey and we will break this down together. But I'm going to put Mr. Harpy here away because he's making it real difficult for me to focus. Aren't you, little buddy? BRB. We're back. So, yeah. Okay. I believe I have good warrant to do so. Below I will write out verbatim NR75 and in parentheses highlight the aforementioned concerns. As you can see, I am completely tech illiterate. This all printed out and used about a whole cartridge's worth of ink, which kind of sucks, but you know what? Here we are. So, starting with line 1, whereas live animal programs where animals are transported to be displayed to, handled, or offered for sale to public can create distress for animals and introduce risks of zoonotic disease transmission and injury for people and other animals. Here's what I think of that. So I understand the concern regarding the spread of zoonotic disease. But I feel it's prudent to mention that zoonosis most commonly occurs within taxonomic clades, not outside of them. The most commonly kept pets by a significant margin, in terms of exotics, are reptiles, which are ectothermic tetrapods whose evolutionary history diverges from us and other mammals approximately 320 million years ago. This is a while. While the risk of E. coli and Salmonella are certainly present when interacting with reptiles, it's important to bear in mind that these pathologies are much more common in agricultural livestock and or food preparation. If you've ever cooked chicken or dealt with raw eggs, there's a reason you wash your hands. With proper hygiene practices, as with cooking chicken or raw eggs, the risk of contracting illness from reptiles goes from low to almost no. As for the risk of injury, the statistics on domestic dogs, no shade to dogs, I love dogs, just saying, the statistics on domestic dogs represent not only a higher rate of injury per capita, but an increase in the severity of injuries inflicted. For example, we have an Argentine black and white tegu, Mr. Jeff. I absolutely love him. Now, he is possibly clocking in at one of the strongest bite forces of any lizard currently alive on the planet. We're talking about 1,000 newtons or 250 to 300 pounds per square inch of bite force. That sounds insane coming from a lizard. Oh, how very scary. If you've ever met a dog over 40, 50, 60 pounds, they're capable of this and much more. Also, squirrels have an insane bite force. Yeah, I mean, can they cause injury? Sure. A great many things can cause injury. But if we're going to use that as a concern in which to affect how we are owning and moving and caring for these animals, then we need to start being concerned about a lot more things, like the fact that we have electricity in our homes, or that one can drown in water and 70% of the planet is covered in that stuff, so we need to get that out of here. I'm dripping with sarcasm, but it's just to the point that this is the danger to public is a sensationalized problem. People aren't keeping Nile crocodiles in their basements. We already have things and laws in place to prevent that sort of thing from happening. So there we go. So moving on. And whereas wild and exotic animals are not domesticated and suffer physically and psychologically when kept, bred, displayed, and sold in captivity. So notice how there's a very key word missing from here, and that would be sometimes, or in some scenarios. They are moving this as a catch-all, whereas wild and exotic animals are not domesticated, and the implication here is that they necessarily suffer physically and psychologically when kept, bred, displayed, and sold in captivity. This is something, well, let's just get into it. We're going to pick it apart. So, while I do concur that wild animals experience these obstacles when kept as pets, it's important to realize that a vast, and I mean vast, majority of these animals are not wild caught, or even captive farmed specimens, but rather many generations captive bred and born presenting notable phenotypic changes. This is a clown ball python. You don't find these in the wild. They don't blend in. This is a phenotypic change. This is not an animal that would survive. in the wild. And these changes isolate them from their wild ancestors. So that in mind, I'd like to argue that although it might not fit the traditional definition of domestication, these animals are domesticated as compared to their wild ancestral counterparts. If they are suffering physically and psychologically when kept, bred, and displayed and sold, this is a result of poor animal husbandry. Cats and dogs are not above this either. Also, human children, sometimes they're not cared for well, and yeah, this is an individual issue, not a general blanket issue you can apply to an entire population of people. Okay, this is a result of poor animal husbandry and not reflective of good or modern animal care practices, which account for appropriate parameters for said species and proper enrichment. For example, this ball python, 2 by 4 foot enclosure, a hide on each side, plenty of climbing opportunities, 90-degree basking spot, down to 75 on the cold side, 50 to 75% relative humidity, hovering towards the higher end there. Is given a frozen thawed harmless rat that cannot hurt him once every 10 days or so. Has fresh water brought to him. There's no predators, there's no parasites. So I'd say that is contestable for sure. So yeah, we're meeting these proper parameters and giving them enrichment. It is also worth noting that animals in the wild are not devoid of suffering, regularly experiencing predation, disease, and habitat loss. Exotics kept responsibly outlive their wild counterparts by years or even in some cases decades. There's great examples of this. Let's take bearded dragons, for example. The average life expectancy of a wild bearded dragon is 7 to 9 years, perhaps 12 for some really lucky ones. But there be predators, there be unforgiving conditions, there be drought, there be all... Why am I a pirate? Point being, they experience all sorts of pressures out in the wild that are eliminating them from the gene pool. In captivity, when they are properly cared for, brought to the vet, offered good balanced nutrition, given appropriate accommodations, they live significantly longer. Captive bred and well cared for bearded dragons are often living into their 20s at this point, which is a heck of a lot longer than 7 to 9 years. Moving on, therefore, it be resolved... Okay, this is back to them. So they say, therefore it be resolved that UBCM ask the province of British Columbia to regulate mobile live animal programs to address animal welfare concerns and public health and safety risks. So what is an MLAP? We, in many ways, are an MLAP. Now, mostly we do a lot of our meet and greet with the animals, a lot of our educational classes, our presentations here at the store. We have a lovely little room set up just to do that in. However, we do go to schools, we go to preschools, we go to educational events, we go to even birthday parties, and we bring animals along. They are transported in containers that are large enough to accommodate them, that's small enough that they're not going to be sliding around during transport. These containers are either solid on the sides or have an opaque lining on them, so the animals can't really see in and out very well. It minimizes stress during transport. They're being moved in regulated environments. Temperature is being controlled. They're being moved within a reasonable distance. They're not in these containers for very long. They're going to these events. Point being that every step along the way we are doing everything possible to ensure that these animals' stress is kept to a minimum and that their well-being is considered to the maximum. If I take these animals out during one of these presentations and the animal is showing me signs of really not enjoying the situation, perhaps it's overwhelmed by the room, that certainly can happen. That animal goes back into a quiet, dark environment where it can calm down, and we move on to the next one. So these animals are not just being dragged out and passed around like a toy. They're being very well respected, they're being very well regulated, because our professional reputation is there. As a political reason, but also we care deeply for these animals. I go to these events and no shade to the kids. I love the kids and I love the adults who are there to learn about these animals. I do care about the animals more. So their well-being is the first priority. I'm rambling, so here is my rebuttal to that. An understandable statement, but in terms of practicality and implementation, there are a plethora of logistical issues. How do you want these regulations to look like? They don't elaborate in here. When governments proposing changes, or unions addressing governments are proposing changes to legislation, but not actually hammering out what those changes are and being really vague and abstract, that makes me nervous. How will they be enforced? Where will the funds come from? Who will train enforcement officers how to recognize proper practices that are extremely niche and species specific? Will said officers be capable of properly identifying said specimens? The people who know these animals the best are the very same people who care for these animals, and self-policing accountability within the hobby is better than it ever has been. If you've ever been on a reptile Facebook page and someone disagrees with your setup, you probably know this firsthand. Poor practices are recognized by enthusiasts within the community, and compliance to maintain best practice is highly motivated to operators of MLAP, if not just for the welfare of the animals, which they love, but by maintaining their professional reputation. So there's sort of the bottom line there, right? Okay. Let's move on to what they are saying next. And it be further resolved, the UBCM asked the province of British Columbia to update the controlled alien species regulation to equally prioritize animal welfare considerations alongside public safety. So blah blah blah, government jargon. And here's the nugget that freaks me out a whole bunch. And to prohibit the import, keeping, breeding, and transport of all exotic species. All exotic species. Prohibit the import, keeping, breeding, and transport. So that's not just putting regulations on things. That's hey, we want to regulate these mobile live animal programs. Also, we want to just make it so nobody can have them, and it's totally illegal. And if you already have them, and we change the law, yeah, well, here's your amount of time to comply, and if that doesn't work out, you're a criminal. So real sneaky, trying to slide that in there like that. I've reached out to some people who wrote this out, and so have people I know advocating against this, and well, let's just say that the response completely ignores that part because they know it's bad PR. Okay, so the refutation. To put it simply, this is a terrible idea, and the follow-through on this would be a travesty, not only to an enthusiastic community of hobbyists, conservationalists, and budding young scientific minds, but also to the animals that are as of current in the care of said community. Perhaps I'm missing something here, but a prohibition is a very specific choice of verbiage, and the import, keeping, breeding, and transport of all exotic species encapsulates all aspects of caring for these animals. Let's start with importation. Well, it is true that some imported specimens are wild-caught and captive farmed. A vast majority of them are captive bred from other parts of the world. So, like, we've never had a wild-caught ball python. There are plenty of these available. There's plenty of wide gene pools of these out there, so we are captive breeding these, producing our own offspring, and then crossing genetic lines throughout the generations to ensure that we're not getting some kind of royal family tree, looks like a shrubbery sort of thing going on. There's genetic diversity here, but these are all long since captive bred animals. So importation, that does still happen in some degree, to some number, and it does ensure genetic diversity within populations. Some species are not as diverse as ball pythons, and so every now and then you do need some new blood to keep things fresh and to keep things healthy. That is a fundamental requirement for establishing these strong bloodlines and avoiding any birth defects cropping up. Of all exotics removed from the wild, very, very few are for the pet industry at this point. Certainly the Western world's pet industry, we're talking Western culture, North America especially, with the vast majority of them are going into skin, fur, or homeopathic remedy industries. where I can assure you that their well-being is far worse off than they would be as pets for responsible keepers. So, say you have a ball python. It's a wild-caught ball python, but the demand for importation as pets completely disappears overnight. Now, I'm not saying that BC is the whole ball python market. Where are you going, buddy? The people who are out there collecting these animals from the wild, that's their job. They're going to find a different buyer. This is going to be the skin trade. This is going to be people who want to dry them up, grind them up, and turn them into aphrodisiacs that don't do diddly squat. So it's where there's an industry, there's going to continue to be an industry. But again, this is mostly captive bred. So that's just touching on importation. Again, I'm not huge on importation personally. I don't begrudge people who are into importation as long as it's done responsibly. But getting rid of it is just going to push it underground, honestly. So keeping and breeding, we're going to lump these two together because they kind of go hand in hand, is of course a prerequisite to keeping and learning from these animals while minimizing the requirement for specimens to be removed from their native ranges. Habitat loss and extermination of species habitat loss and extermination of species as a direct result of environmental ignorance driven by stigma, the only good snake's a dead snake, all that kind of crap, is the primary threat that these animals face in the wild. Their extinction can only be reduced to extirpation via their continued existence through responsible keeping and breeding, ensuring there is adequate stock and genetic diversity in these species' captive populations, that they may at some point be reintroduced into their native ranges after conservation efforts are made to return their environments to a habitable status. A lot of people still haven't picked up on the fact that this planet is heating the freak up. That's just an objective fact. This is having a massive effect on our ecosystems. Also, when you take an animal that lives in a very niche range and you pave paradise and put up a parking lot, that animal can't live there anymore. If that animal only lives in that range, it's now extinct. If they exist in an ARC capacity as pets within the wild and private collections, the animal is now not extinct. It is extirpated from its range. It doesn't exist in the wild anymore, but it's not gone entirely. This means that if we ever tear down that parking lot and plant paradise again, perhaps these animals could be reintroduced. The sheer mass of specimens required to maintain an adequate genetic diversity for these ARC ambassadors means that zoological societies and other conservational organizations simply can't do it on their own. We're talking wide gene pools, and a handful of zoos working in conservation can't really keep up with that level of genetic diversity all that effectively. So they need the public's help. So here we are. It requires diversity to be maintained. Basically, that requires the diversity be maintained by members within this hobby. Okay, transportation. And of course, transportation is required to facilitate the above points. You can't keep or breed them without transporting them. That is going to happen from time to time. This can be done in a responsible and safe way that minimizes This can be done in a safe and responsible way that minimizes stress on the individual animals. We talked about opaque and non-transparent containers with adequate ventilation, space, and climate control with special attention paid to restricting the amount of time animals are in transit, resulting in content pets that acclimate well to their changes of environment. I feel it's also prudent to mention that stress is not necessarily always a deleterious experience. We experience stress on a daily basis, at least I do. That is how we grow as people, how we learn to cope with it and survive new and familiar stimuli. Without stress, growth stagnates. Think of a child with a helicopter parent living their life in a bubble. They're going to have to enter the real world one day, and if they've been coddled their whole life, it's going to go horribly. Yeah, interactions are stressful. I am a person with social anxiety. This isn't really something I've mentioned on the channel before, but it's a lot easier for me to speak to a camera or the animals than it is to other people face to face. I'm a lot better at it than I used to be. I go to these mobile live animal presentations, I teach these classes, because I spent years being massively stressed out by talking to people. I got better at it, and the better I got at it, the easier it was to cope with that stress. I grew. Without that stress, I would not have grown. I would not have grown at all. So there we go. Without stress, growth stagnates. Okay. Now we get down to the big cheese. I cannot understand the request for complete prohibition on exotics. A move that would only work to move the care of these animals out of the hands of responsible keepers and into the laps of the underground market. This is how prohibition typically goes. You prohibit alcohol, people are making it in their homes in unsanitary and less safe conditions, right? Also, you can't tax it if you prohibit it. To any government folks out there, just bear in mind, you gotta make your chunk of meat. Yeah, so yeah, it moves it into the underground market while simultaneously removing the effect of a safety blanket that these species have against extinction. We touched on this, should their populations and or environments continue to be degraded by human activity. Again, perhaps I'm not understanding what's being proposed here, but it's written in plain English, and I feel like there's really no room to misinterpret the phrase we propose the prohibition of import, keeping, breeding, and transport of all exotic species. It only means one thing to me. Hard to convince me that you mean something else by that. Okay, written below the posted resolutions are some comments, which we talked about, one of which is as follows. The membership also endorsed Resolution 2023 NR50, which sought to amend the regulation to create a positive list, or white list, of permitted species, which will replace the existing negative list of prohibited species. Now, whereas I understand that this is not being proposed in NR75, it's interesting that that's in there as a cliff note, and I'm hoping that's not there to be presented as a compromise, but I do find it curious that it is included. It seems a redundant point, given that they are potentially proposing a complete prohibition on these animals. And I can't help but to wonder if it is there to push a bias on the committee, since they already approved that in 2023. P.S. The provincial government just kind of said no. So if this goes through, that can still happen. So yeah, I find it interesting that it might be there to push the bias on the committee to approve NR75, if not open the door to a softer compromise to prohibition. The whitelist systems have historically been expensive, impractical, and chock full of logistical issues. I presume the provincial government understands this, given that in 2023 it was never implemented. Given that our economic climate is in a larger deficit than when it was 2023, I personally believe the provincial government doesn't have the resources to address or implement a ban on exotics or whitelist implementation, given that homelessness, poverty, and geopolitical issues run rampant and should be taken higher priority over legislative changes to the exotic pet ownership industry. And then I wrote, thank you for your consideration. I hope you will take my perspective as an engaged member of the community into consideration when voting on NR75 as a representative of our community. Thanks, Eric Beitendorf. So, that's my email to him. That went out to all municipal offices within British Columbia. That was a long email list that, since I'm technologically stunted, couldn't really figure out how to send more than to one person at a time, but we got there. It's been sent out. I'm hoping that those municipal bodies have at least a couple of them read it, and hopefully it can sway their opinion on this, or at least give them some more context to work with that isn't pushed by the bias of the person who is proposing this in the first place. We're not done. We talked about white lists and black lists. Let's talk about the difference. I apologize. I did write all this jazz. I just, well, I have a really hard time focusing and really bad memory. So, thus all the notes, thus all the lack of eye contact, and I apologize in advance for that. So, whitelist. Okay. The differences. So, a blacklist ban, also called a negative or prohibited list, that's this bad boy right here, is a more traditional approach. It starts with the assumption that all exotic species are legal to own unless they're explicitly named on a prohibited list. So think of it like a list of banned items in a school. As long as the item isn't on the list, you can bring it. Similarly, under a blacklist system, any animal species not on the government's list would be considered legal to keep. So the pros, from the keeper's perspective, is that this system allows for a greater variety of animals to be kept, including many that haven't been evaluated for risk. It's based on the principle of individual liberty, and where something is permitted unless a specific harm has been identified. So this is our blacklist. We actually have 3 of them in BC. So we have the first one here isn't per se a blacklist, it's a restricted species list. So these are animals that we have listed. We have some of these animals actually that have certain restrictions placed around them. So boa constrictor, all species. Clearly this is, what is this, 2012? Because boa constrictor, all species isn't a thing anymore. Now you have boa constrictor, boa impaired, or boa occidentalis. It's been broken down further. However, this will grandfather over to include that. So yeah, boa constrictor, all species, Madagascar ground boas, Australian brown pythons, olive pythons, blackheads, carpets, Papuans, Ramses or womas, water pythons. Then we move over to lizards. All varanids, so all monitor lizards except Komodo dragons, Nile monitors, parentes, lace, water, Bengal, crocodile monitors. Those are prohibited. You can't have those at all. So the restrictions on this restricted list are reasonable. Essentially, what it implies is that if you have a snake, something within the Serpentes, which exceeds 3 meters in length, or a lizard, so any other squamate that isn't Serpentes that exceeds 2 meters in length, the requirement to have a possession permit for that individual species will be in effect. Now, I said all lizards, but that's wrong. They're talking specifically about varanids. So, like, if you have a 7-foot-long iguana, that's not something you need a permit for. If you have a 7-foot-long blackthroat monitor, now we're talking potentially needing a permit for that. So, a restricted list. Makes sense. Works, right? You can have these things. If they get to a certain size, you do need a permit to have those things. I think that's reasonable. And then we have this bad boy right here. This one looks less official because I copy and pasted it. But this, would you stop wiggling, my buddy boy? This is the Wildlife Act, essentially. So basically what this means is if this is a native species or closely related to a native species or capable of becoming invasive within our environment, you can't have it. So like all Ambistomidae salamanders, which is the mole salamanders. I'm pretty sure axolotls fall under this. You can't have that because that's classified as wildlife in BC. Even though axolotls aren't native to BC, they could potentially survive in our environment. That could become problematic. All species of Dicamptodonidae, the giant salamanders. We have the Pacific giant salamander, the Tenebrosus here. Yeah, you can't have that, and that's fair. It's keeping the native animals safe, right? That's fair. You can't have any Ranidae, which is the true frogs, Helidae, tree frogs, which is why you can't have a White's tree frog. So yeah, and then you move over to Amididae. This is like red-eared sliders. You can't have those. Yeah, well, technically you can possess them, but you can't transport, breed them, release them, any of that jazz, right? So yeah, there's our Wildlife Act, right? Protecting our native wildlife. I agree with this. I think that's a pretty good dealio. This is the big one. This is our primary blacklist, our prohibited species list. I'm not going to list all of these because it's 33 pages long. There's a lot of critters on here, and most of this is pretty common sense as to why most people shouldn't just not a good pet. American alligator, not a good pet, right? Freaking Nile crocodile, not a good pet. This is pretty reasonable. Some of these are a little goofy, like you can't have any Boega cat-eyed snakes because they're classified as venomous, rear fang venomous. They'd have to bite you and chew and chew and chew and chew and chew. And unless you had some sort of allergic reaction, you'd be just fine. There'd be a little bit of swelling, a little bit of discomfort, but you'd be okay. But if we're going to ban things based off of their potential for allergic reaction, we need to start with peanut butter. But you can't have rhinoceros vipers, you can't have king cobras. You know what, I agree with this. This is the blacklist system. It's effective, it works well, it outlines the things that could actually be a threat to public safety, like crocodiles and cobras and that kind of jazz. Reasonable, right? I think it works, but they want a whitelist system. So let's talk about what a whitelist system. He's going off and doing his own thing. So this positive list or whitelist system is basically they assume that everything's illegal. If you want to keep it as a pet, it's probably illegal, unless it's on the whitelist. Also bear in mind that they haven't highlighted whether or not they're going to put anything on the whitelist, so there is that to consider. So it's like an exclusive club's guest list. If your name isn't on there, you can't come in. This is a terrible freaking idea. This has been implemented in places across the around the world before, and it doesn't work out well, generally speaking. It's very expensive, it's hard to implement. You have to train all of your officers to recognize the species within the whitelist and all of the color phases that are present within that species. Ball pythons, there's thousands of different morphs. They'd have to be able to look at a pastel butter HRA spider ball python and recognize that it's still a ball python they're looking at. So whitelist systems just don't tend to be an effective route. Again, I understand that NR75 isn't technically proposing a whitelist system, but it makes mention. There's the main gist of it. We actually interviewed a few of our customers to see what they thought about this whole thing. We had some questions lined up, so let's go over to that and let's see what y'all think. For someone who's new to this, what's the most important piece of advice you could give them?
My biggest recommendation would be education. Educate yourself as much as you can. Watch videos, research online, YouTube videos, TikTok videos, talk to your pet store, talk to any experts you can think of, friends that have them. Basically, the more information you have, the better chance you're going to have at being successful.
Could you explain the thought process behind designing your animal's enclosure? What goes into creating an environment that is both safe and enriching?
So I spend a lot of time researching the natural environment of the animal and watching tons of YouTube videos and just planning it out before I get started, making sure I know if it's arboreal or terrestrial, and getting the substrate correct for the environment, lighting, everything. And then when it's time to finally build, buying plants, mounting, climbing structures, everything like that.
Awesome. Do you have some examples for us you could show us?
I do, yes. So I just recently got this custom enclosure made by Cornell's World, and I got them on either side of my fireplace here. So on the tops we have terrestrial enclosures for small animals, and then the lower ones are 4x4s, which will house bigger creatures. I currently have a boa in here, and this is up for rent for a new critter one day.
Hi there, my name is Rye.
What initially drew you to keeping exotic animals?
Well, I got Poppy here when I was 9 years old. My mom told me that I could have an animal as long as it didn't take up crazy amounts of space in my house, didn't make noise, didn't smell. So I picked Poppy here, and for the last 13 years, she has been my best little buddy. She helps me do homework. She helps me meal prep. She's good motivation, because like, look how old she is, but she's still going strong, you know? And I love her, and she taught me how to be responsible. She taught me how to manage chores. She taught me how to schedule time. She's a little bit angry when she doesn't get her food on time. She also taught me to be adventurous and to not be afraid of being a little weird, because it's not often that you meet a 9-year-old just absolutely obsessed with reptiles. And she taught me how to be confident with myself and just enjoy life for what it is and find things that I like, animals that I like, and she taught me how to do that.
And why don't y'all let us know what you think in the comments below. Is regulating MLAPs a good idea or a bad idea? This is Reptile Expos. This is educational events. This is that guy who came to your school when you were a kid and got you interested in these animals. That's another thing to bear in mind, actually. A hands-on, up-close experience with these animals is what makes what makes people care about these animals, right? Seeing them in Nat Geo or seeing them on YouTube is one thing. Seeing them in person is a whole other. I had a mild interest in reptiles when I was a little boy, because what little boy doesn't? I wanted to be a dinosaur farmer. I'd say I actually got kind of close to that. The only ones beating me are chicken farmers in that regard, but that doesn't sound as appealing to me. And then I saw a garter snake in the wild. And then I caught the garter snake in the wild, and I handled it for a little bit. It hung out with me for a little bit of the day. I brought it back to where I found it from. I re-released it. That was a transcendent experience for me. That thought never left my mind after that moment. And there were times in my life where I wasn't working actively with reptiles, but it was always lurking. And it's certainly come back to the forefront. So would I be doing this without that experience? I don't know. There weren't really reptile people in my town growing up. It was a small town. But I do go to a lot of schools. I do go to a lot of daycares, a lot of outreach programs. And I tell you what, usually it's younger kids, and they're not going to learn the history of the evolution of snakes. They're not quite there yet. But they're going to be fascinated, and they're going to have questions, and they're going to learn that these aren't slimy animals, and that tongue isn't going to hurt them. And you see them light up. This can be transformative for a lot of these kids. They become hyped, and they want to learn more about these animals. And that's what education is all about. If you cannot captivate a child's interest, good luck teaching them. So this is what these ambassadors do, and we bear their well-being in mind, and they do it really, really well. So it would be a real shame to get rid of that. I understand that they're just recommending regulation. I'm just a little concerned about what regulation means, because they didn't elaborate at all as to what they mean when they say that. And also, what do you think about a prohibition? What do you think it means when they say that? Do you think that means an all-out ban on reptile ownership? Because to me, that's what that looks like, and I'm really struggling to interpret that any other way. If that is what they're recommending, do you agree or do you disagree? I already know why you'd probably disagree, but I want to know your point of view. If you agree on the idea of an all-out ban on these animals, let me know. I'm very curious, and I'd love to address any concerns that you might have, because perhaps you just haven't met any cool reptiles yet. Anyways, that is all we've got. That's all I've got for today. It's late. I'm tired. I'm gonna go make a steak in the toaster oven.